Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 42 of the ITSM crowd. My name's Claire Agutter. I'm your host for today, and our topic is all about everything cloud. So, the first thing I'm going to do is ask our expert guest to introduce himself and just tell us a little bit about your background, where you've worked in the past, and where you're working at the moment.
Certainly will, and thanks for inviting me on, Claire, and hello everybody. My name's Steve Chambers. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Cloudsoft, who are specialists in migrating, running and evolving applications in the cloud. And my role at Cloudsoft is very customer focused, very product services, how we basically help customers with the cloud. And to get to this point, I've done a lot of work in the cloud over the last 6 or 7 years, working with companies the citation. So I've kind of seen a lot on my travels, and I'm trying to bake that into useful things that help people really exploit the cloud and get benefit out of it.
Fabulous, thank you very much. So we are going to talk around the topic of cloud. We're going to talk about some definitions. We're going to talk about some things for you to think about. And as our audience is generally service management focused, we are going to look as well at the impact of cloud on the role of service managers and what service managers actually need to do. If you've got questions that you want to ask Steve, we will be keeping an eye on Twitter during the broadcast. So ask anything you like, use the hashtag ITSM crowd, and we'll pick that up. We'll put it to Steve, and Steve can answer that actually live. So I am going to be the cloud dunce a little bit on this episode, which I would love to say is a pretense, but in fact there's quite a lot of fact behind that. And I think what I'd like to do, if it's okay, is just start with some of the definitions, because we all talk about cloud. We talk about things like somebody else's computer, which isn't the real correct definition as I understand it. And then there's all these different types of clouds. So we hear about, hybrid, public, on-premises. So I think, first of all, it would be really helpful if you can take us back to basics and just talk to us a little bit about what we actually mean when we say cloud.
Yeah, cool. I mean, this has been like a Twitter debate raging for a number of years now. I mean, I remember this going back to 2007, 2008. So this has been happening for 10 years. I think the jury is no longer out. I think we all know the answer. A real cloud is a public cloud. Mm-hmm. Everything else is a lesser version of that. Now, there are people that are going to complain and say, you're wrong, Steve, but I'll have that debate with anybody. What's important, I think, for service management professionals to think about is that if I think of a service manager, I'm thinking of someone who cares about the business, cares about customers, cares about uptime, resilience, security, change, all those things about getting the service going. Mm-hmm. And the best tools for that are in the public cloud, and they're mostly free as well, which is amazing. Whereas if you regress a little bit and you think, one of the options is, and by the way, public cloud, I'm talking about the Amazons, Azure, and Googles of this world, and there are other versions, but they're the big ones. If you think of the other end of the spectrum and you talk about private cloud, it's a very murky world. There's a phrase called cloud washing that came out where, let's call them legacy vendors, were saying, yeah, you can now have a private cloud, when really all it was like a VMware virtualization cluster. That's all it was. Now, I do recommend, if someone's more interested in the detail of what clouds are, do a Google for the NIST cloud definitions, and it explains them all. So I'll just quickly run through them. So you have the two spectrums, private cloud, public cloud. And there are 5 essential characteristics of a cloud. But the private cloud, really, in simple terms, it's provided by one company and it's consumed by one company. It's just a one-to-one. So, if I work for a bank, I build my own cloud, I consume my own cloud, that's private. Don't share it with anybody else. Now, people, I don't think as much today, but people said the reasons to do a private cloud are it's more secure. Load of rubbish. People think if you hide your servers in a data center behind a firewall, that's secure. That idea has been totally debunked. Hackers can find all kinds of ways into your organization, usually through people. And you have people on private cloud and public cloud. So people are often the weakest link. The other reason that people would do a private cloud, so if you're working in a company that's got one, is you may already have data centers, already have kit, maybe have a 3 to 5 year investment. So you need to sweat that asset, right? So you really need to exploit it. So that might be a reason where you can deploy some private cloud software onto stuff you've already got, and then it's a bit of business sense. but don't fool yourself that that's a cloud, because like one of the aspects of a public cloud, one of the essential characteristics is broad network access, meaning you can get to it from anywhere. Not so with a private cloud, because it will be buried in a data center somewhere behind firewalls and a VPN on a private network that you probably can't route to. And broad network access is really important, because the whole thing about cloud is you're actually gluing services together to create a business service. So if you've got something that's hard to consume, is lacking services in a private cloud, it's just, the best way to describe it is, once you've tried a public cloud in anger for real, it's like a ratchet mechanism. You know, you feel yourself going forward. And then if somebody asks you, well, can you use this private cloud? All the things that you've got used to, the security, identity, and access management, the metering, the insight, the billing, those don't, you know. Somebody would argue against me and say, well, you can run OpenStack in your private cloud. Very, very difficult, very technical. And you've got to ask yourself, right, as an employee of a company, why are we spending money rebuilding something that I can just rent for cents on the hour? Why am I I need the people. They're very expensive to find people who can build a private cloud. I've got to have the kit, I've got to have the software. It takes me time. This is a bit that's often forgotten. If you start two people in a race to deploy a new business service that is well managed under service management, start one with a private with no private cloud, because you've got to build it first, right? And one that can just rent one straight away. By the time the private cloud has decided on what kit they're going to have, it could be 9 months. You've already deployed the service, and you can kind of see how the fast can eat the slow, because most companies that build private fast use the public cloud. That's a big difference. Now, in between that, you've got hybrid cloud. So again, this is a little bit of murky marketing from the legacy providers to say, well, hey, okay, public cloud is a thing. Why don't you attach our private cloud to it and glue it together, and we'll call it a hybrid? And so it has one control plane to cover both. Sounds great. Best of both worlds. Actually, no. You get the worst of both worlds, because that control plane, all it can do is give you access to the lowest common denominators between those two clouds, which is usually the techie, compute, storage, networking, the typical kind of virtualization layer. You're not advancing, because if you look in a public cloud, what's great is it's got managed databases. So instead of you installing MySQL in a virtual machine and running it yourself and monitoring it and all that stuff you have to do, patching, maintenance, you can just rent it from Amazon.
Yeah.
A sense, click a button, makes it highly available across data centers. And you know someone else is managing that professionally, because that's their full-time job to do that. So hybrid cloud, not a fan. It never used to be a product either. It used to be like a PDF of gluing this to that, and you couldn't buy it as a product. I think Microsoft have made the biggest advance there. They have now, you know, they've got Azure as a public stack, and you can now buy Azure Stack, and you can put that software on something in your data center and kind of glue those two things together. But still, it's reduced functionality on one side, because it's not a public cloud. So it's kind of like, you know, it limps on, but that's the best version. You can buy that as a product. And the worst one that really gets my dander up at the minute is multi-cloud.
Oh, okay, that's a new one to me.
So I just did a debate with the great Bill Mew and Jez Back on Disruptive Live TV about this. There are outlier reasons to do multi-cloud. Now, multi-cloud is, imagine hybrid cloud, but more than two.
Okay.
So 3 or 4 clouds glued together sounds like a monstrosity to me. Really difficult. And what particularly gets me crazy is, so again, it's the same vendors that are guilty of hybrid cloud are saying, this is the strategy for all enterprises. And that's a load of rubbish, right? And the way I described it to others is, multi-cloud is difficult, because if you're not good at one cloud, and people struggle to be really good at one cloud, this is not easy stuff. How are you going to be really good at many clouds? I just don't understand, right? What you're going to end up doing is you're going to be shallow across many clouds, and it's the lowest common denominator yet again. So, and each cloud you use has overheads, service management overheads, cost overheads, labor overheads. So if you've got 4 clouds glued into one somehow, you've got 4 sets of overheads, so it's costing you more, and you're only using a thin layer of each cloud. So you're getting less value for more cost. So I don't understand the logic. There are outliers for this. So there are some big companies that have got a lot of legacy they might have 20 data centers and lots of different technologies. And multi-cloud is something that would help them kind of bring this under some umbrella. But let's not kid ourselves that this is easy or cheap. But they'll only do that as a way to rationalize. Ultimately, they want to get down to 1 or 2 clouds, perhaps separately managed, go deep on them, get loads of value. So they're the 4 different types, really. You won't find multi-cloud in the NIST definitions either, because it's a bit of it's a crazy thing, really. So private cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, and public cloud. There's also one called a community cloud, which is one that's shared with a limited audience, but that's not a commonly seen thing. I hope that helps.
It does, and I think as you were kind of going through those, you've mentioned some of the benefits and maybe the problems associated with them. But there's kind of another question that occurred to me as you were talking, which is, do you think cloud is being driven by the way that we now work within many software organizations as well? Do you think cloud is essential if you want to work in a DevOps environment, or if you want to use agile development practices?
I would say all the tools are there for you to use, ready to go. Often they're free. If you look at someone like Amazon, code pipeline and all those things don't cost you any money.
Yeah.
Might not have all the features of a super duper specialist's continuous integration, continuous development pipeline product, but they do the job. I mean, that's what clouds do. They do the basics, do them really well, and then they add features over time. So I wouldn't say it's essential, but again, if you're not going to use it in a public cloud, you've got to build your own. And I can understand from the technical guy in me, who's kind of dying slowly as I get older and I'm doing more business, but I can get it, right. Yeah, you want to build your own thing, and it's like some people do to do the technical bits and build it. But I would ask from a management point of view, why am I spending money building, rebuilding, solving a problem that's already been solved on my own premises? And you've got to ask yourself a question. I've been to a lot of meetups like you, Claire, and I do remember once a contractor saying to me, when I questioned why he basically rebuilt a platform as a service, why didn't you use Cloud Foundry? I think I asked him. He says, what you don't understand, Steve, which is always a good starting point, isn't it? What you don't understand, Steve, is I have to make this really complicated so I get my contract renewed.
Okay.
So there are people out there that are making things complicated on purpose, and I wonder if they're pulling the technical wool over business people's eyes for that reason. I mean, it seems crazy, but I think that's happening.
Yeah, because you were one of the contributors to the first Verizon book that we produced last year, and I remember in there you were talking about the fact that if you're looking at this from a startup perspective, why is anybody going to invest? Why is anybody going to give you money to build your own data center when you can, lease the same thing and it becomes very, very scalable, and it's something that if you need double next week, you can get it, and the cost isn't prohibitive.
Yeah, and this is where I'd like to see. I talked at the Service Desk Institute about a practical guide to cloud for grown-ups. Cheeky title, I know, but in there is a serious message that I really see as people who really exploit the cloud are essentially moving up the stack and leaving the technical bits to a professional cloud company who does this for a living. They have great uptime, resilience, and all the other good stuff. So as we're moving up the stack, there's 2 things I'm seeing. One is developers can get more stuff done without having to go through complicated IT pieces. But the other side of that is I see this role called a cloud service delivery manager being able to have less technical wool pulled over their eyes, and they can actually see into the cloud. They can see the billing. They can see how services are glued together, and they can have a more active role without being super technical, where clouds, I do see that, and it's a missing piece. When I've traveled around, I mean, at Cloudsoft, we help run applications for people, and one of the key processes, we kind of glue the 3 together: change, config, and release, because that's, it's getting stuff done in the cloud, isn't it, really? So when we bring on a new customer, we find out what their flow is today, and then where they kind of want to aim for. And then we iteratively help them develop that over time. So no big bang or anything. Put some metrics on. And I'm thinking this would be a perfect role for a cloud service delivery manager. And I do expect to see more service management involvement in cloud in future.
Yeah, because I think for, if we go back 5 years, the service management role very traditionally included things like availability, capacity, security, service continuity. And when we move to the cloud environment, a lot of that's being taken care of on your behalf. So, how active a role does service management need to play in a cloud environment?
So that is a really key and pivotal point, Claire, right? Because and this is a key confusion, and I think people are shocked when they hear this, right? When you use a cloud provider like an Amazon, there's a shared responsibility model, right? 2 tiers, and it says this is what Amazon take care of, like in the cloud, and this is what you take care of on the cloud, kind of thing, right? And the key thing is you are still responsible for availability. They give you lots of tools and things, but not everybody uses them.
Yeah.
Like some people still deploy. There's a thing called auto scaling groups in Amazon, where it's basically a service that will keep your virtual machine running. If it fails, it'll start another one. You can say it so you get more traffic. It'll scale out, increase the number of VMs. When your traffic drip, it'll go back to 1 VM. Some people don't even use that. So that tool's there, and it helps you with resilience to demand. It helps you with resilience to outages. So it's an example. The tool's there. If you don't use it and you have an outage, you didn't pick the tool, right? Sometimes people deploy things in one availability zone, which is like one data center.
Yep.
It's really easy to deploy something with AWS to multiple availability zones. So even if Amazon loses an availability zone, your service keeps running, but not everyone does that. So you can kind of see. So I would expect as a service delivery manager, because as the and if you look at regulations, if you look at the Financial Conduct Authority, their guidance to regulated finance places, it's not a regulation, in the guidelines it says you are still responsible for availability, you are still responsible for security and compliance to the regulations. So it's a little bit, this is what is different from outsource. Like if you get an outsourcer and it's like that old my mess for less kind of thing, and they take on your service management and they take on responsibility in the SLAs. Not so with cloud. So you still need that service management layer even if you're using a public cloud. Some people think you don't. They think the cloud's going to look after it for me. That's not true.
Yeah, I must admit that is almost a misconception that I have, which is, you are paying someone else to take care of this on your behalf. But so how financially savvy does the cloud service manager need to be? Because I have heard some kind of horror stories about, for example, I'm getting a tea delivery.
You said that was going to happen.
I know. I've heard some. Thank you very much. Thank you. I've heard some horror stories about organizations that kind of didn't manage the cloud environment. So the developers had free rein to, spin up new environments and there was no control over that. Is there a financial element that organizations need to be careful of as well?
Totally. And, I remember it was probably nearly 3 years ago now. There was a great webinar from RightScale, who are one of these kind of multi-cloud managers. And it was about multi-cloud back then. And the VP of Technicolor came on and he was just telling all the stories about how difficult this is and how there was a missing role. Who's responsible? No, who's accountable for the financial performance of the cloud? Because there's no hiding place. It's not like in the old world. You made an investment that lasted for 3 years and people almost thought it was free to consume that technology.
Yeah.
So that mindset still exists today, but when you put it in the cloud, it's really classing an appliance from the Amazon marketplace where all the billing's bundled in. So it's really easy to use. So they deploy the virtual machine and marketplace, you're getting charged for the resource consumption and you're getting charged for the use of the software. And then it's Friday afternoon and they go to the pub at lunchtime and they forget all about it. And at the end of the month, they get a whopping bill. It's like, oh my God, what happened then? So I think at the moment, it's not really clear whose role it is in different organizations. In our company, we have a director of operations who keeps an eye on this, and he's keeping the constant downward pressure on costs. That is a service delivery management role for me, for the CSDM. And there's loads of tools and stuff you can do to control it. If you don't have this cloud service delivery manager, it tends to be someone like in a project management office that takes care of that, someone used to budgets and being responsible for performance. But it's a real thing. There's lots of third parties that can help you. There's like the Cloud Health, Cloud Abilities, Cloud Rangers that can turn stuff off for you automatically, so that helps, and then also help you understand your bill and where you can save money. So it's very important. In fact, it's when people don't do that properly, the cloud can be very expensive. And I'll just give you a quick example. If you pay for cloud resources on demand, you're paying for premium. You're paying for the ability to switch on and off at will.
Yeah.
So you pay typically a 300 to 400% premium for that. So the first thing I do when I meet a customer is I say, are you buying everything on demand? If the answer is yes, I say to them, I can save you 20 to 40% without breaking sweat. Right? And they're like, how? And you just have to know which things to do and just get a process together, keep that going, and you could be saving a lot of money.
Yeah. Is there any training available at the moment that actually addresses this whole cloud service delivery manager skill sets? You know, if there's people watching thinking that's maybe where my role needs to evolve, where would you recommend they go start?
I think the best content you'll get for a real public cloud is on AWS. They seem to be the furthest ahead.
Okay.
So they've got two frameworks. One is called the well-architected framework, and that's got 5 pillars, and it talks about operational excellence, and it talks about availability and all those good things. That is worth a read through, definitely. Then there's another one. So I always think about the well-architected framework is like the stack of things you need to take care of, and then you look after those over time. And then there's a left to right framework, which is called the cloud adoption framework, which again is very, very IT service management oriented. It talks about people, it talks about governance, talks about business, and then it links those to technology as well. So again, that's another quite practical framework. I'd be surprised if people aren't offering training courses on them, but all that information's free. I think for the CSDM, I think do a Google for the slide deck I did, because I kind of condensed all the things I'd seen from the Service Desk Institute. That would help. But yeah, I think that's the best option at the minute.
Yeah, I have seen there is a Cloud for Service Managers training course, but I'm not familiar with the content of it, so I don't know if how much that addresses these topics.
I would be cautious. In organizations I've worked with where they have had mature IT service management, I almost felt like I was back in the early virtualization days, back about 12, 14 years ago. When virtualization came along, IT service management was a barrier to you, because people were like, there's this thing called vMotion, right? We could move a virtual machine running from one host to another. And they said, is that a change or an incident? And we used to have these conversations all the time, and it used to delay the rollout, and now I have found, like, there's one particular place, no one had done cloud in there before. There perhaps 1 or 2 technical folks had trialed it at home, a little project. And so the service management team said, right, here's our framework, make the cloud fit that. I was like, I'm not sure if that's the right way to do it. I think there's definitely, go from your framework to the cloud, but definitely go from the cloud back to your framework and see what you need to change. Because, and again, it's always thinking about why on earth are you doing the cloud? And the reason you should be doing it is number one is not cost. Number one is not security, although they're 2 of the big things that people focus on. It's getting stuff done faster. I mean, that's really what cloud is all about.
Yeah, and I think, I remember having the same conversations when Wi-Fi was first starting to be used, and quite often it was people in IT going, oh, not sure, might be security risk, there could be someone driving past with a Pringles tube, and I think sometimes it is that kind of lag when it's, the business is making all these demands, and sometimes IT struggles to keep up a little bit, but quite often there's bigger problems in the organization.
Well, often, one of the unspoken but well-known anti-cloud group are people who feel their job's at risk, right? So there's that, quite pejorative phrase, it's difficult to sell Christmas to turkeys, but, if cloud is going to reduce the amount of technical staff you need, they need to adapt, they need to change. This service delivery manager role needs to come out, and we need, instead of being like a server tech guy, you need to be someone who can glue cloud together. And do you know what? When I sit at the Amazon console, I feel like I'm in charge of a huge computer with a straddle cloud. I mean, we work with startups who are like 20 people, but they're a global brand.
Yep.
You know, and they're batting so far above their weight because they're using these tools, and you know, they can serve content really fast to people in Australia because they're using Amazon's content delivery network. You know, the attitude is so different in some organizations. You've got those that are like, well, no, do we really need to do that? And then you've got these kind of fast organizations that are saying, what else can we do? What else would benefit our brand? I never know what I'm going to experience when I meet an organization. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think we seem to come back to it on every single episode of the ITSM crowd, which is the speed of change, both in technology and in how business operates, is just accelerating. And I think, you know, it comes back to lifelong learning, looking at how your role is going to evolve. We had Dominic from Moogsoft on a couple of episodes ago talking about AI ops and how that's going to change the operations role. But again, not to say those jobs are disappearing, but those jobs are changing and hopefully getting more interesting as well, which, you know, that's what most people want, I think.
Yeah, and I'll just give you an example of how that is changing. You know, there's this thing in cloud called immutable infrastructure. And the big difference it finds, you know, like I remember when I first came to London in 2000 and I worked for a service provider, we had a guy that would sit there every day and log on to each server, run some commands, make some changes and log off again. And he would do that all day. We don't do that anymore. Well, some people are still doing that, but really you deploy from automation and you create an artifact and you deploy the artifact and you know it works. And, you know, you deploy the same artifact and you just, you know, from a service delivery manager point of view, I'm now confident that that change is going to work. It's like doing releases on a Friday afternoon when you're playing ping pong and you're not even breaking sweat because you're using the same process for development that you use in production. You know, so I would imagine in the cloud, a service delivery manager should be a much calmer, happier person.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I'd like to see. Less burnout, as they talk about in DevOps.
Yeah, and I think there's different skill sets that come into play, and one area that I see as becoming much more important is this whole procurement, understanding contracts, understanding how to define what you need and put those agreements in place. And we see that in the SIAM world as well. There's a new set of skills that are coming in and that are going to be important for service managers.
We're going to announce a service we've got that makes the cloud easy to consume for service managers that specifically at the moment use ServiceNow. I know it's the No 18 conference, isn't it, this week, and it's the Amazon Summit in London. So basically, from within ServiceNow, you can use the same request and approval process to consume Amazon. Now, the way you consume Amazon is through, in this case, is through what's called the service catalog. So I'm sure service managers around the world know what a service catalog is. But it's interesting, like through that Amazon catalog and the marketplace, you used to only be able to buy appliances. So really you needed to be a technical person that was, you know, doing that. But now you can even buy SaaS services, online services. You can buy all kinds of things. You can even do a private offer between you, AWS, and a vendor to get enterprise discounts.
Wow.
So, you know, so when you talk about cloud procurement, and if I look at the stats for migration, so migrating apps to public cloud, the stats, I think they originally came from Forrester, but I saw them on an Amazon slide, were like 40% of migrations are rehosting, which is basically just copy your virtual machine from here to there. I don't recommend that. A lot of people are doing it, 40%. Fragile way of doing it. You've still got a load of work to do on the back end. Re-platform is like copying but changing things to be more cloud native. And there's a bunch of others, but repurchasing, which is going through the service catalog. Like, for example, if you're running email on your premises in your data center, the adage is friends don't let friends run email anymore. You just rent that per user, right? Who does that? So you can buy that service through the catalog. So instead of migrating your mail, turn it off and rent it from someone. And it's now becoming the same for a lot of other things. I mean, you know, I think your business is like ours, Claire. You know, we just use a lot of cloud services, right? And glue them together. I wouldn't even dream of running anything on our premises anymore. So that repurchasing is going to really go. And I can imagine the cloud delivery manager being involved in that, because that's, you know, you're you're buying services to kind of link into your cloud. So watch out for that one in future.
So we're coming to the end of our time now. That has absolutely flown. One final thing which I've seen you blow up about on Twitter, and I'm just curious. On-premise versus on-premises. What's all that about?
So a premise is like a statement of truth. You know what I mean? And premises are buildings. Two
Yep.
totally different things. You know. So when someone says on-premise, they mean on premises, but on premise, that doesn't even make sense to me. It's like a nonsensical phrase. And the worst thing is, some people even know it's wrong and they still do it. But the worst thing is, right, you know, all joking aside, I mean, I do like laugh and joke about it. But if someone is telling me they're a cloud expert and they say on premise, I'm like, I just switch off.
Yeah.
I have to, if I'm reading a paper and I see on premise, I don't read anymore. That's it. And I'm not on my own. There's a lot of people like that out there. So if you use on premise, stop it and start saying on premises, please, for your own benefit.
So there you go, a final thought. Thank you so much, Steve. That's been a hugely educational 30 minutes. We will leave this up on our YouTube channel so people can catch up afterwards. Steve, your Twitter handle is?
At UK Cloud Pro.
So if you've got any questions you want to follow up with Steve with, then you know where to find him as well, and we'll have the usual ITSM blog that goes up too. Thank you all very much for watching, and we will see you on the next episode of the ITSM Crowd. And thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.